I grew up in a Christian family. Um, I was a bit disillusioned with the whole thing. I believed in God, and I believed that Jesus was probably the correct understanding of God, but there was this lack in my heart. I didn't feel love in my heart, and I didn't feel that connection between God. Not only that, but I didn't see any of the supernatural things that was claimed in the Bible happening. So I got into drugs. That was pretty much the only place that I knew where to go to at least find some sort of supernatural experience. I expected it to be negative when I started because I was warned by so many people, don't do drugs because they're demonic and you'll get possessed or you'll get brain damage, blah, blah, blah. But after I tried marijuana for the first time, I was instantly hooked because it opened up so many possibilities and my perception of reality shifted. I became way more creative, and not only that, but I felt like I had this greater connection to God because that love that was lacking, when I was high, it was there because I could feel that appreciation for the world. However, over the course of a few years, that understanding of drugs gradually shifted into the reality of it, which was that I had become a prisoner. I didn't feel that love in my heart when I wasn't high. And that's not a good thing. Just because I could feel it wasn't a good thing. I should be feeling it all the time. And so over a course of 2 years, I eventually got to that point where I was so depressed because I didn't have anything going for me. I was addicted to this substance called synthetic weed. They call it synthetic marijuana, but it's not marijuana. It was what I consider the most addictive substance on the planet. I had friends who were addicted to meth and they couldn't quit this. And so I was just crying out to God to try and save me and help me. And in my heart, I knew that I wasn't going to get help because I was doing it to myself. This was my choice. I remember that one night I was on the beach alone, high on synthetic marijuana, just crying by myself because I was in such a dark spot. I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I was close. And along came a girl, and I wasn't interested in dating, but for some reason I met this girl and had this spiritual connection to her. And the moment I had that connection was when I finally realized what love was, to not live for myself, but to live for someone else. And I believe that was the moment when my life turned around. And I can't say it was like, I can't say my love for her was God, because I know a lot of people say like, love is God and God is the force. I believe love is God, but I believe love is a person. But my love for her was the very thing that broke me out of drug addiction. One night I couldn't do it anymore, and I just threw out $300 worth of the stuff into the garden and never touched it since. And so I was madly in love with this girl, and so I honestly believe that you cannot get a person to quit drugs unless they fully embrace love. And so that was the beginning of the journey. Little did I know that my love for her was going to be the only way to find God. Not through experiencing emotion for her, but through trying to save her, because she had a really terrible spiritual illness, and I discovered that only about 3 days after moving in with her. I was trying to talk to her about God quite a lot because that was my passion at the time. Even throughout all the drugs, like I was always obsessed with spirituality and finding God. But every time I would talk to her about it, she would get angry. And one time I tried to discuss it with her, and she just exploded and became super angry and was swearing at me. And For some reason, she didn't even seem to know who I was, like I was some sort of stranger. And it was at that point when this voice, like not an audible voice, but this powerful message just went bam in my head. And the message was, she has a demon in her. And I thought, whoa, that's crazy. So I just stopped her for a second and I asked her, do you think you might be being oppressed by an evil spirit? And it was at that moment when her eyes rolled into the back of her head and she just fell backwards onto the bed. Thank God there was a bed behind her. And this voice started speaking through her, a different voice. And it said that, to start with, it was mocking me, and it said that it owned her and I couldn't do anything. It said that I wasn't a child of God, because here I was, with my Christian upbringing, trying to cast it out, saying, in the name of Jesus, leave. And it was mocking me, and it said, you don't know God. I was shocked at the time, but what it was saying was actually true. I didn't know God. I knew of God, but it's like knowing a celebrity and never meeting them in person. So that was a freak out moment. And I didn't know what to do, but I had experience in the past with some other spiritual people who had prayed for people and seen miracles. So I took her to them, but we had to wait about 4 days before we got to that point. And every single day something really terrible would happen. One day she felt a weight heavy on her chest and she couldn't breathe and she was suffocating, and I had to just put my hand on her and pray for her and just beg God not to let her die. Another day she would feel sharp pains on her neck and bruises would start appearing on her neck. And another day I would go to work, and this is what she told me. She said that when she was walking to work, she became delusional and walked in front of traffic. And right before a car going at 100 k's an hour was about to hit her, she said she felt a hand pull her back, and then she turned around and nobody was there. So crazy stuff happened, and eventually I took her to these people. They were part of a church, I think it was called Kingdom Culture Church, and they prayed for her, and I instantly felt like the gravity just lifted, and she became free after that point. But something that the demon had said when she was lying on the bed was, if you get rid of me, I'm going to come back with 7 more. And unfortunately that came true, because even though it had left her, she had not changed her life to the point where she would be free from that stuff. She was a very troubled girl, and I loved her so much because I could see where she'd come from. She was very traumatized from her childhood, but that pain had clung to her and she hadn't let it go, and because of that she had been doing the wrong thing behind my back in a relationship that nobody should do. I had a dream one night of what she was doing, and I even had a dream that in that place and what she was doing, one of her friends was there too, which I knew about. And so in the morning I asked her, and she said it was true, that both her and her friend had been doing those things. I'm not going to go into detail for her sake, because I know that she's past that now. She's not into that sort of thing. She's a changed person. But that sucked to hear that. But I forgave her. And I still wanted to save her, so I chose to support her while she looked for a new job, because the stuff was in the type of job that she was doing. So for 2 to 3 months, I was supporting her, trying every day to fix her and to save her, because although the demonic spirit had left, she was still holding on to that pain and that lack, and it was still destroying her life. So after about 2 or 3 months, she said that she wanted to go back to work at a massage parlor, and I eventually agreed. I felt that it was probably going to end up the same way it did before, but I agreed anyway because I just wanted to see. I think it's important for every person to never try and control each other, but it's more important to see who people really are and help them from that point on. So I let her go back, and slowly things became worse and worse and worse, and I was I was very willfully ignorant of the situation because I thought it had been dealt with, and things had become so worse that eventually hit that point again where she almost killed herself. And that night I realized that the demon had come back with 7 more just like it told me. So I had insomnia at that point. I wasn't sleeping. I was probably sleeping 2 hours from like 6 to 7 or 8 in the morning. And I could only sleep once she left the bed, because there was a demon in the bed with me, and if I did fall asleep, I would have traumatizing nightmares. The only way that I thought I could save her was to find God myself properly, not just as a belief system, but as an actual reality. And so I started meditating. I did the basic mindfulness meditation, which is just to empty your mind, focus on your breath. And I was hoping that God would reveal himself through that. And he didn't. So I eventually started searching online, and I came across an Indian guru who was saying that God is love and you need to meditate on love. And so that reminded me, because the Bible says God is love as well. That reminded me of that scripture, and I started meditating on love. It didn't take me a week. It didn't even take me a day. It took me about 10 minutes before I had a supernatural encounter with God. I was lying on the bed, and this presence just came over me, and it's coming over me right now. It's just this incredible warmth and love, and this electricity pulsating waves through my body. And this still small voice just said, "I love you," and I just burst into tears because I'd finally found God. And I started meditating probably 2 or 3 hours a day, developing this relationship with my Creator. It didn't take very long before I started seeing pictures in my mind of just having conversations. Like I would ask him questions and I would see a picture of something. And these pictures would start coming true, or this knowledge that I shouldn't have had, I had, and then I would be able to make decisions based on that. After about a month of doing that, having a demon in my girlfriend, suffering from insomnia, but still developing this relationship, I eventually had the faith to ask him what I should do with Bonnie, my girlfriend. And I saw this picture of a skull jump out at me, and then I saw really clearly in color 2 ships traveling side by side on an ocean, and one veered off course and crashed into some rocks and exploded. And that boat was my girlfriend. So the first thing that I knew that I had to do was leave her, because God was telling me that she would die if I didn't. But before that, I wanted to make it sure, because I loved her more than anything. I had told her I wanted to marry her. And I called my mum. I told her I needed her to pray for me. I didn't tell her the situation. I didn't want her emotions or her psychology to interfere. I wanted to be purely confirmation if this was true or not. So she prayed, and then she said that she saw a picture of two boats side by side, and one veered off course and crashed into some rocks. She saw me swinging on a rope, and that rope was breaking, and if I didn't jump off the rope would snap. There were many other visions that I won't go into, but there was probably 5 or 6 confirming one after the other that whatever I was doing, I had to stop now. So she came home from work that evening, and I told her what had happened. I told her everything, and she didn't get it at first, but once it clicked in, she started weeping uncontrollably, screaming and crying. It was the worst I've ever seen anyone cry, because she had idolized me. I was her number one reason for living, and I had just removed myself. So she immediately tried to jump from the 4th story window of our apartment, and I had to restrain her. And not knowing what to do, I called my mum instead of the cops, and she just screamed at me, "Call the cops, what are you doing?" So I called the cops, and they arrived, and the moment they arrived, she immediately just stopped and was still, and they took her away, and I was left alone that night, despite everything that happened, with nothing but a peace. It's just like the air was peace, and this just that presence of love was just staying with me. And for the first time in probably a year, because we were together for almost a year at that point, I was able to sleep the entire night without fear and without nightmares. She came back in the morning because they couldn't do anything. She was just a normal person from their perspective, and got on her knees and begged me to take her back. So I said I probably won't, but if there's a chance that I could take you back, we should go to a church and talk to someone and get them to pray for us. Because she hadn't wanted to go to church that entire time we'd been together. She'd always hated the idea. So we went to a place called Glory City Church in Kelvin Grove in Brisbane. And once we walked through the door, we just felt this electricity. All the hair on my body just stood up. We both realized at that point that this was far greater than our relationship. And we decided to split into 2 opposite sides of the church. They were playing music, and I was crying out to God to just... I didn't know what to do. I'd just given up the one thing I love most in the world, and I just wanted God. I didn't want anything else. But I didn't know how. I didn't know how to have that. And then they announced that they were going to do something called a fire tunnel, which is when all the elders of the church would get in a line, like on either side, and you would walk through, and they'd pray for you that God would descend and touch your heart. So I decided to go through that, and I was crying as I walked through, and at the end, someone laid their hands on me and they said, "God, whatever he's going through, I want you to double it. Whatever is happening, double it." I don't think he realized what was going to happen, but I immediately hit the floor. And God just touched my heart. I had never had an encounter with God like that before. I was face to face with my Creator, and I wanted to kill myself because I was unworthy. I was so disgusting, everything I'd done in my life. The drugs, the pornography, alcohol, everything. And I was face to face with perfection. And I was unworthy, but after about 20 seconds, this wave of love just hit me and just completely obliterated everything. every part of my past and my consciousness, like my ego, it was just destroyed. And it was like I was given a new consciousness. It's like that person was a different person, and I was given this new life. So I totally get why they call it rebirth. All these Christians in my life saying they've been reborn, they've never had this experience. So I immediately went from the most painful experience in my life to the most perfect, blissful experience I've ever had. And I went from screaming into laughter. And I stayed on the ground for about an hour, I'd say, just in this pure bliss, crying and being with my father for the first time. And I can't explain it, but that was the moment when my life changed. All that worry, fear, insomnia, addictions, gone. And I had a new life, and I had a new purpose. And I had finally been reunited with my true family. And oh man, I opened my eyes. And because my eyes were closed for an hour, I opened my eyes, and the entire universe was probably 10 times the detail that it was before. And I could see fractal patterns everywhere. Like on the carpet, it was like murals of these amazing, intricate patterns. And they were shifting and moving, not like hallucination, but what was actually there. And I've proven this before. I can actually get pen and paper and trace the carpet and demonstrate where these patterns are and take the paper off, and then you can notice the patterns. But yeah, God just gave me that ability to see these fractal patterns. And it's improved my artwork. Just I know exactly what to do before even touching pen to paper, because I can just see it in my mind like a 3D picture. And so I immediately ran outside, because it's like, whoa, I'm in this new universe now. And I looked at the bridge, and on this concrete bridge overpass, I saw in fractals on the concrete the words, "Realize eternity." And I was just bawling my eyes out. My back got healed as well. I used to have scoliosis, and that's partially half the reason why I had insomnia, because I used to have back pain all the time, especially from my work, because I work on computers like 8 to 10 hours a day. I went to church 4 weeks after being reborn, and someone put their hand on me and prayed for me, and my neck went back into place. And it wasn't very proper, but I was just saying the F word repeatedly in the middle of church, just like, holy shit, I can't believe this. And I ran and I put my back against the wall, and my head was touching the wall, and no back pain, and that was incredible. And the girl who prayed for me, Ebony, she said, I believe, like she said, she saw in the spirit that my hands were on fire. The next person that I touched would be healed. And there was a girl next to me, a lady in her 40s, who said that she had arthritis in her shoulders, and her shoulders were inflamed, and she had muscle problems as well. And I put my hand on her, and I felt like the deltoids under my hand just like move, and I was freaked out. It was like a slug had just like moved under the skin, and I was totally freaked out, and all her pain just left, and she could swing her arms around, and yeah, she was crying, I was crying. Man, but I couldn't list the amount of miracles that have happened since knowing God. I've tried writing them down, but there's just too many. I could fill a book. I could go on for hours. But most of all, I believe that the biggest lesson that I try and teach people is, don't think of God as an ideology. Don't think of God as some belief system. Don't subscribe to the beliefs that your parents taught you. Don't do that. Don't even don't even just read things and think, oh yeah, that's God. I'm just going to accept that. Because there's such thing as a porcelain God, a God like an idol, like a golden calf, for example. You can worship that gold, but that gold's not God. God is everywhere. And the only way to find him is to deliberately set time aside, deliberately seek him above all else. And only when you take away every other priority from your life and put God on top will he reveal himself to you. See, people have asked me, I've asked God to show himself to me. But that's not the way it works. It doesn't work that way. You have to deliberately put him on top. If you'd like to meet God, but you'd rather, have fun, watch TV in the afternoons and, drink alcohol, play video games, and, God would be a nice thing. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Unfortunately, you have to deliberately put him on top. And for me, to be fair, I thought I was the most religious person in my school, and I was. But, I had to have depression, drugs, and a demon-possessed girlfriend before I was able to put God on top. And that's really sad. That's terribly sad. But, there's this prayer that I teach people. I say, if you can't put God on top, ask him to do it, but you have to understand that you're going to go through a lot of pain before that happens. But if you're willing to say, God, put me through whatever, I don't care what you do, get me to that point, I want to know you, then that'll happen. I've done that probably 6 times since then. Every single time I go through really painful stuff, but it brings me closer and it makes me trust him more. So, yeah, I guess that's my story. And I think the most important thing I learned throughout all of that was to be still. Be still and know that is God. And meditate on love, because God is love.